Hello there and welcome to the MCS pre-scene analysis. Now this is just an intro clip to introduce you to what the product range actually is and sort of, the contextual factors so that you can have the utmost confidence in the process for your exam success. So the first thing is that my name is Joseph and I am the MCS expert at Astranti. I write mocks for the MCS as well as offering, tutor responses to any MCS queries as well as F3 queries, and I also write portions of our study text in regards to the MCS and F3. So that is my sort of background. I've been, working with the MCS for around 2.5 years now. It's quite a few sittings so far, and I've had a lot of sort of knowledge around this kind of level for a number of years now before I took over as the MCS expert at Astranti. So you can find sort of sneak previews and video clips surrounding the MCS and exam success in the case study at my Facebook page, which is sort of shown at the bottom. If you search that, you will find, all kinds of clips on a weekly basis regarding the MCS, even when there isn't a pre-scene around yet. We look at some examiners' reports. Okay, so besides that, what actually is the pre-scene? Well, it's a video series first and foremost in this analysis. We go section by section, covering each page in as much detail as you'll ever be required to do. It's very speculation based, but ultimately we're using our P2 and E2 theory in sort of the page, like the wordy sections of the pre-scene to pull out all the relevant points, as well as, applying F2 to our numerical information in the financial section. So the key points, industry guidance and how that relates to the company, and also we apply the business models. This is done mostly in the strategic analysis, but there will be mention in each section when it's particularly relevant. We talk about extensively the likely exam issues based on applying all this theory as we go through. So there will be hints to you and sort of key focus points for you to pick up on as we go through. There's also, these sort of standout exam hints and tips that we do come across. Like there are some that we're speculating on, and there are others that are just huge indicators that I will 100% point out to you, sort of the given questions that will definitely turn up in one of the variants. And potentially that variant is yours. We then have the strategic analysis, which is a very focused business model to pre-scene sort of video and presentation. And we have the top 10 most likely issues, which follows up all this information with essentially the top 10 problems that are likely to come up in the exam, with the top 1 to 4 being almost a guarantee that they will be, definitely there. We have a pretty good success rate. I believe in the past 5 sittings we have scored about 7.5 correct issues in the majority of the different variants. So with that in mind, you can have a lot of confidence in our sort of guesswork and speculation. And then there's the other ones near the top of that list, which are basically guaranteed to come up. So how is it going to work? We'll go section by section. We'll assume that there's no knowledge as I progress. So by that I mean you haven't pre-read the pre-scene. We'll be going through together as it was our first reading. If you've already read it, great. But I will assume that you have not read further on at any given point. The only thing I will assume is that you're relatively well versed in our F2, P2 and E2 modules, at least enough to be able to go back and revise a topic if, we mention that it's particularly relevant. What I suggest throughout this series is that you read a section and make notes just before, you watch it or just after you watch the section. And this will mean that you can compare and contrast with my speculations and sort of inputs, and this will give you the biggest and most well-rounded exam prep you can possibly get. So very much go with that. It's very, very useful. And as we go through, of course, I'll have my review. At each video end, I will sort of sum up to the best of my ability what we've covered and why it's important. And of course, the last two products, we'll be going through a full strategic analysis and the top 10 issues, which are pretty straightforward as we discussed in the previous slide. So, without further ado, you will now cut to the current MCS pre-scene for you to get stuck in with. Hello and welcome to that time again, the management case study. And we'll be looking at the pre-scene material for the February 2019 sitting, and it centers on Crowncare. Now, in the first video and throughout the series, we're going to go through different sections of pages, and in this particular video, we're going to be talking about the introduction, dentistry, and Crowncare's history. And then the following pages will be in video 2, and so on. So, with that said, I will just put a small caveat that in terms of the sequence of videos, we will be doing the financial video last. So when we skip the financials for video 5, it is because we put them in video 6. But other than that, everything is going to be sequential. I'm going to go through it page by page. So let's talk a lot about the introduction. Now, people often overlook the introduction page of these pre-scenes, and ultimately that is short-sighted, because whilst the pre-scene is the context for the exam and all the unseen material you're going to have, it is very appropriate to think of the introduction as the context for the pre-scene, which makes it very, very important. For example, if we go straight in here and have a look at the first sentence, we immediately are shown that Crowncare is an unquoted company. Now, that means that when we think about financing, equity financing could mean a listing via IPO, for example, and this could potentially be an exam issue. And immediately after that, we're told that Crowncare are a company that operates 30 dental practices. Now, that in itself, that very short clause, tells us that it's a chain. So that must mean that there's a structural consideration to be had. Do they have a divisional structure? Do they have a functional structure? How do they account? They're probably going to have a number of subsidiaries. I imagine the practices themselves might be the subsidiaries rather, and this then brings us to group accounts. So, from that clause we have what is the structure, because they are a chain, and also because there's so many practices, they're probably subsidiaries at this point, if I think about it, and this will mean that there may be some group accounting implications. Furthermore, we're told that these dental practices are in Capital City. Now, we can't presume too much about Capital City. Oh wait, okay, so hold on. This Capital City is the largest city in Varentia. Okay, so this means that being the largest city is going to be attractive to young professionals. This means that we have a greater opportunity to have our human resources acquire the best talent. Now, that's particularly relevant when we think about dentistry. It's quite a highly skilled profession, so the fact that they're in the largest city in Varentia means that while staffing could become an issue with the skills required, they're going to have ample resources available to them in the form of young professionals in Capital City. So, if you needed any more proof that this introduction section has a lot of hints for our exam, well, I would be surprised. So, as we move on now, we get to consider about Varentia. Now, Varentia appears to be a developed country with a relatively high standard of living. So there's two things I want to point out here. the first thing, being in a developed country, we're going to be thinking about the pestle factors immediately. And then when we think about the relatively high standard of living, this has quite a strong implication for dentistry. This means that not only will these rather affluent and wealthy, people in that population be interested in the sort of typical dentistry, like fixing your teeth, fillings, root canal procedures, all those sort of standard preventative or curative procedures. There's also the industry issue of the rise of cosmetic surgery or procedures in dentistry. And if the country has a high standard of living, there's typically going to be more customers with the resources in terms of their wealth to be able to afford these cosmetic and potentially vanity-leaning procedures. So, let's note that down. Now, for just a moment, let's revisit pestle, because the next sentence says that the population is well educated and aware of the need to maintain good health. On top of this, they also say that the rate of unemployment is generally low, and the Varentian government provides extensive healthcare paid for through taxes. Now, several things that we need to speak about here. So, the first sentence about the rate of unemployment being generally low, this is an economic and social pestle factor for us to consider, especially when we move on and see that the extensive healthcare is paid for by the government. So there's a number of pestle factors, the politics of having that healthcare policy for the wider population, the economic factors such as having this rate of unemployment being very, very low. So typically people are going to have the resources to pay for, say, cosmetic procedures or perhaps for private dentistry. And of course, socially, there's going to be, this emphasis on good health. People know about it and they're well educated on it. And this typically means that people are going to go to the dentist. So, regular custom can be somewhat assumed given that they are operating in the largest city in Varentia, and Varentia has a population that's well educated, aware of the need to be in good health, and they're typically employed. And if they aren't, then healthcare is paid for by the government. Now, I would like to draw your attention back to this final point about the healthcare being paid for by the government. This raises the question of, is the government one of our customers? Is the health service that they're running, similar to that of the UK, the NHS, I imagine this is going to have a similar name. Are they a customer? And if so, because they have government links and are probably very, very large and expansive, given that they are operating or giving healthcare to the wide population that can't afford to have private healthcare, then we have to then consider, if they're a customer, where do they fit into Mendelow's matrix? And what's the kind of buyer power coming from? Because they're typically going to be a customer. And with this in mind, we can imagine, at least at this point, you can speculate that the buyer power is going to be particularly high because it's a state entity. And also in terms of Mendelow's matrix, we're going to have to keep them happy because they do have this sort of wide effect on the industry. They support a number of people that can't afford to go to the dentist. So at this point, we can speculate that the health service for the government that's providing this health care and paid for through taxes is going to be a very, very big factor for Crowncare. So, with that said, this means that these first two little parts of the introduction have given us a wide variety of our potential, not definite of course, we are speculating, exam topics. Now, Mendelow's matrix and Porter's five forces, where we find buyer power, they're going to typically be in the E2 syllabus, whereas pestle is predominantly found in the P2, and then of course things like group accounts are in F2. So already we have a variety of coverage of the syllabus in potential topics. Anyway, let's move on to another F2 potential topic. Now, Varentia's currency is the V dollar. Now, this is quite innocuous. It's just a tiny little sentence. However, it's very, very relevant. Because they have their own currency, foreign expansion is going to generate currency risk because the currencies are different. And this means that whatever we think about when we talk about any sort of unseen material regarding expansion to a different country, we have to at least consider the fact that Varentia has its own currency. So Crowncare, when they expand, are going to be using exchange rates, and there'll be a variety of currency risks involved, such as translation and transaction risks. Though dealing with them is not super important at this level, we do have to recognize them and provide mention in our evaluation. But I'll get back to the point of evaluation in just a moment. On top of this, companies in Varentia are required to prepare their financial statements in accordance with the IFRS. Now, this is very relevant again to foreign expansion. This makes it easier because typically most countries have this standard, the IFRS. So, if we already conform to the IFRS in our financial statements, we will more easily be able to adjust to a new market with different, or in this case it would be the same regulations regarding financial statements, whereas if we didn't do this, then we would have quite a drastic change to be made within the company if we were to expand overseas. And now we're on to the final part of this page. Yes, just the first page, and still so much to talk about. So, we are told that we are a financial manager in Crowncare's head office, and our primary responsibilities are with management accounting. Now, this comes up in every single pre-scene. However, it's crucially important. This is the examiner telling us that we're now a step above what we're used to. So we've done the OCS for many of you beforehand. If not, well, it's still going to be a good way to think about things. So bear with me. Our focus is on evaluation. That is the crux of our role. So whether you are familiar with the OCS or new to the case study, it's vitally important that you dispel any prior sort of understanding of what our role is and focus primarily on evaluating the options. It's that extra step above understanding the operational inputs to accounting. It's more a case of evaluating the performance of different accounting features and coming to some kind of small suggestions whilst also demonstrating knowledge. And we will see that in the past papers, in mock exams that we offer, and in the real thing, essentially. So please keep in mind that your role is predominantly with management accounting and you need to focus on evaluation. Okay, so moving on, we now go on to a couple pages that I have quickly peeked at just now. And they're not super exciting, but not to worry, we'll get as much as we can from these sort of contextual pages that cover dentistry rather than crown care. But the final page of this video has a bunch of stuff by the looks of it, which we'll get onto. So it turns out that this first sentence is actually one of the most relevant to our understanding as far as the pre-scene hints are concerned, or the speculation. Dentistry is a branch of medicine that is devoted to the prevention of diseases in the mouth and jaw. This relates to Campbell's Rules of Mission Statement. Now, if you don't remember what that is the theory by Campbell in E2 regarding what our purpose is, our strategy, our policies, that kind of thing. Now, Campbell's key part in terms of our purpose, why do we exist? And this gives us a hint that perhaps Crowncare exists because they are seeking to prevent disease in the mouth and jaw. However, that might be a little bit too optimistic. They might be looking for some profit along the lines as well, or in terms of offering the best cosmetic features as well. But it gives us this idea that so far we do need to think about as why does Crowncare exist? What's their purpose? Why do they do the business decisions that they do? So following on from this, we are given a further sort of explanation about dentistry. Feel free to read through that if you want to familiarize yourself with the industry and what it covers, because it is a healthcare industry and there is obviously a very specific sort of aspects to it that differentiate it from other industries such as simply selling a product. However, there's not too much speculation we can derive apart from that first sentence within this first paragraph. However, there is a mention about children being born without teeth and growing a temporary set in the ages of 6 months to 3 years, and then they get a permanent set later on. Now, this means that we can consider that our demographics of who we have sit down in our dentist chair changes what kind of treatment options we have available to us. So this has some operational sort of implications in the sense that you wouldn't necessarily use root canal on a child unless it was extremely necessary. For example, these sort of harsher procedures, you don't need to know the names per se, you can just say the more harsh procedures that you would use on adults, you can't really in most cases use on a child with children's teeth. Also, because they lose the children's teeth, is it really worth going through the effort when they grow into adult teeth later on, or replaced rather by adult teeth later on? So, demographics of our customers do matter. Once again, following this, we are given a further breakdown of how the tooth is structured. Now, I'm going to be brutally honest. There's not a lot we can speculate for our exam based on how a tooth is sort of explained, to be perfectly honest. So, feel free again to read through it. Unfortunately, this does come pretty early in our pre-scene pages. Typically, this is thrown in the middle somewhere. However, we're going to skip past this paragraph in particular and a little mention here. I'm going to talk about some other features of the next page regarding teeth and dentistry. Okay, so we're on to the next page, and the first thing that sticks out to me is that good oral hygiene is the key to preserving both teeth and gums. So let's assume that those who go to the dentist often and have a lot of procedures done, particularly those of curative and preventative nature, they're going to have oral hygiene that has led, or previous oral hygiene that has led to issues with both their teeth and gums. This means that customers will have a variety of different treatments that need to be applied, and there's going to be different treatments for both teeth separately and gums separately. So this means that we have product differentiation across our range and how we treat our customers, and this is relevant in terms of how we cost things potentially, how we budget for different procedures, and in terms of perhaps staff interactions with the customer and what they're prescribing to patients to solve their dental issues. Now, as we go through this paragraph, we can see that there's reference to toothpaste, fluoride, also the sort of brushing motions. So toothbrush, fluoride, toothpaste, these are just typical supplies that dentists will have, perhaps not even for their own treatments, perhaps as add-on products or freebies to their customers. So again, there's a little bit of supply aspects we can pull from this paragraph, but again, because of the topic of these 2 pages, there's not a whole lot we can grab, unfortunately. Typically, pages are abundant in information, but this is more contextual for your benefit. Anyway, before I ramble too much on the specifics of these 2 pages, let's pull what we can. Not a tooth, however, just some issues. Yes, that is a cheesy joke for you. The human jaw can exert a great deal of pressure when biting or chewing. Now, this is a bit of a wild one, but again, it is something we can at least consider. You're typically not going to want to put your hands in someone's mouth if they're in a great deal of pain. Dentists do often cause a bit of pain when they do a procedure, and if your hands are within the sort of jaw range, if you will, of a patient, they could feasibly bite your fingers. That could lead to some injury. And essentially, this means that there might be some health and safety implications we have to worry about. Now, of course, if we look at this objectively, every industry has health and safety implications. However, in this case, it might relate to what kind of instruments we use, how long they are, to keep hands and fingers away from potential jaw closures from patients that are in discomfort or distress, that kind of thing. So again, we're going a little bit off the beaten path, but we're doing what we can, and health and safety implications do come into it, given that, we are in close proximity to, some jaws, which are very powerful by the sounds of it. Okay, now here's the meat and bones of these 2 pages, which are quite important for our speculation about the unseen material. Dentistry generally focuses on prevention and regular checks, blah, blah, blah. Dentistry can also have a cosmetic aspect, which we've kind of alluded to already. Now, these 2 things here are very specific in terms of they relate to procedures. We have to think about who creates these procedures, who finds out about them, who does all the testing, how do they, develop these techniques, essentially. Now, this is typically, we can at least speculate, this is probably going to be like dental colleges, perhaps a board of dentistry from the government, and these people that generate these techniques, they are inherently going to be stakeholders in terms of we're going to need to interact with them to get the best up-to-date techniques that are then be able to be used on our patients to give the best possible care. So this means that we have to factor perhaps these research organizations, teaching organizations into our Mendelow's matrix. Now, they probably have a relatively medium interest in Crowncare, and likewise, we have a quite medium interest in them. But what could change that is if we're told about potential staff sponsorship to different dental schools. Then you're more integrated in your relationship, even further from medium, and then suddenly you're both quite reliant on each other. For example, let me just walk you through a quick speculative potential agreement. So, Dental College 1 develops certain techniques, helps Crowncare bring in the most up-to-date, innovative solutions to dental problems, and in turn, given this good service and this very good research, Crowncare put their junior staff through sponsored programs through this dental college, and the dental college derives monetary benefit or revenues via this staff sponsorship because Crowncare are paying for tuition. Now, this has implications both ways, of course, because you're improving your staff from our side of things, Crowncare side of things, and in turn, you're also helping the college, who then may be more willing to help us implement the newest techniques, and perhaps they would even do it for free, essentially. I don't know what the specifics are. It depends on the unseen material. However, it's very important for us to consider who creates the procedures, how do they factor into our Mendelow's matrix, and then how do we what's a possible avenue in which we interact with them in an exam setting. And staff sponsorship, in this case, could be one of those things. So, without waffling on further, let's write this down so we can remember it and ingrain it into our understanding of what could potentially come up in the exam. Okay, and that wraps up the dentistry section. But we've got a very, very jam-packed page full of information here before us. The final page of this video, Crowncare's history, and let's get stuck in. The first thing we see here is that the Varantian Health Service introduced free healthcare funded through taxation. We have heard that already before, but crucially, we can see that under the newly established VHS scheme, dentists carried out the work that was required and submitted claims to the Varantian Health Service. Yes, that is the Varantian Health Service and not the video home system. But with all bad jokes aside, there's quite a crucial and important invoicing aspect to this. So typically, Crowncare are going to be invoicing the VHS scheme when it takes on these kinds of patients. And this may mean that there'll be some discrepancies. Perhaps Crowncare will charge the average customer more than what the VHS are willing to pay, or perhaps there's some kind of unique way that you have to invoice for the VHS. So it's important to note that invoicing is a relevant sort of question mark based on the VHS scheme. Now, after growing steadily for more than 30 years, they found themselves the challenge of offering the best quality care in Capital City, and they established an excellent reputation. So, this links back once again to Campbell's mission statement aspects. Why do we exist? What's our purpose? What do we want to achieve? And typically it looks like, or at least apparently it looks like, we're interested in the best quality care. We want to give the best quality care and, use that for an excellent reputation as a dentist. Importantly, given that we're growing over 30 years as well, linked into our mission statement, best quality care, typically customers are desiring quality perhaps over price. Now, I can't say that with any certainty, of course. We've had no pricing given to us at this point, but perhaps in dentistry specifically, customers want to get the best quality rather than the best deal. So we have to put that as a sort of speculative point here. But yes, it does appear that Crowncare wants to be the highest quality provider in Capital City. And importantly, the next section talks about how Crowncare became incorporated, and it had 11 partners and 7 surgeries that were across Capital City. However, importantly, they then converted this partnership into a limited company and shared the equity. Now, if you don't recall how this particular part works, or this aspect rather, we're incorporating the company by the company becomes a separate legal entity to the owners, and thus reducing the liability of the owners. And then we move into a limited company sharing the equity. It means that you then have the liability of the owners is decreased further, where they're only liable to the debts of the company equivalent to the amount of money they've invested. So how much equity they have in the business. Now, this is quite important because in limited sort of companies, you're going to have these larger shareholders, quite like 11 out of 100%. So every partner is probably going to have anywhere from, say, the low end, maybe 2%, through to 10, 15, maybe even 20% for the largest partner in the firm. Now, this essentially means that there could be some disagreements at the board level because they're all quite invested and likely to be former dentists on the board rather. So their opinions can be quite entrenched. They can have very specific views, maybe a new technique, etc. There could be a lot of disagreements at the board level given this kind of structure, given that those partners are likely to be dentists. So these disagreements do raise the possibility of a board issue to come up in the exam. The problem with me saying that is that the board issue could be on many, many topics, ranging from how the business is run, where it wants to be, the mission statement, all these kinds of things could come into it, literally everything. So whilst I do want to point out that this could bring a potential board issue, I don't want to specifically say, what that entails, because that does rely entirely on the unseen information. So next we come on to more about the VHS. Now, importantly, many dentists in the 90s were becoming increasingly unhappy with this health service. Dentistry had increased in sophistication since the introduction of free dental care in the 40s, and VHS was forced to specify the treatments that it would pay for. Now, this is the kind of invoicing issue that I alluded to before. So at this point, it says that the cost to the taxpayer would be prohibitive if it paid for all treatments. And this is kind of the problem. When you have a private company taking on customers that utilize the health service, they're going to be using outdated techniques, or at least the cheaper techniques that don't really give the patient the best quality. So it's at odds with our proposed mission. We've sort of speculated that the mission of Crowncare is to be the highest quality provider. Well, if the VHS dictate that you can only do one of the older style fillings, for example, compared to any newer ones that they've got, then suddenly you're not offering the best quality anymore because VHS are dictating. That is the buyer power that we alluded to in the first page. So with the buyer power with VHS, it does appear to be extremely high, and it was so high that perhaps, I think if we read down a little bit further, that Crowncare actually decided to not really take those patients on, or at least reduce the number. That's at least the impression I'm getting here. So that's something we need to note down, of course, but perhaps when we get further information later on in the pre-scene, we might even see that the VHS are no longer a customer. We'll have to see. But I suspect, at the very least, Crowncare have reduced the amount of VHS patients on their registration. So, as we move down, we can actually see that, if patients could not or would not make such payments, we're left with limited treatments on the VHS. So, the mercury amalgam is what they're using as an example. It's silver in colour. And that's what the VHS dictate that they are to use for fillings. And then by 1990, there was the translucent polymer resin that's almost invisible, but was more expensive and unavailable on the VHS. So again, high buyer power, placing restrictions on Crowncare's services. And this means that customers won't get the highest quality with those restrictions. Now, again, this then is at odds with our speculated mission of being a top quality provider of dental care. So if our purpose, as outlined by Campbell, is to be this high quality or the highest quality provider of dental care in Capital City, being dictated to by VHS as this really powerful buyer is not really going to work. So as we move down here, we can see that Crowncare decide to promote private dental insurance to ensure that they can have customers that are going to be able to access these high quality treatments without too much of a high cost, that they actually use the VHS system. So it explicitly states that there are very few restrictions on the use of preventive and restorative treatments. For example, dentists could use the polymer resin fillings rather than the mercury amalgam. So promoting private dental insurance has alleviated the issue of the VHS being used by customers, and this sort of at odds contrast to our mission is not happening or not occurring as often as before. Now, importantly, on this topic, there is a very important industry issue. That is that of captive insurance companies. And ultimately, these are subsidiary companies that provide insurance to the parent company, right? So it's very intricate. We don't need to know exactly how they work specifically, but ultimately it is a innovative way to cut costs on your insurance. However, there are some caveats to that in the form of they can be quite generous, as in too generous, and things like that. A little bit too, or rather lacking transparency. So it is an industry issue because, if you're solely responsible for your own insurance as well, as in a subsidiary is, that might not be able to cover the damage that happens. Say, for example, Crowncare have a dentist practice and it burns down for some sort of reason, like a accident. And no one's harmed, blah, 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 but all your equipment, the offices, everything's ruined. And the building itself, practically ruined. That's a huge, huge cost. And if you're insuring yourself, you probably can't really stump up the money to afford the insurance on that, to actually change everything back to normal. So actually your insurance policy is not actually functional up to a certain point, and this has its own risks in terms of the liquidity of the company and it mitigating versus gaining some risk in terms of when those big, huge problems happen. So just something to mention, it might not even come up, but I just wanted to put it out there because it is important to at least be aware of the possibility. So with this said, it is unspecified as to whether they're promoting a different, completely separate dental insurance or their own dental insurance company. Now, that is an interesting topic. We'll have to wait and see. But as we move on, we can see that in 1995, Crowncare had stopped accepting new VHS patients and had persuaded its existing patients to purchase dental insurance, or at least move to a practice that offered VHS treatment. Now, this is quite interesting. When we relate it back to the point I just mentioned, if they're promoting the dental insurance as the primary option for customers, which it does appear to be, again, speculation, but in this scenario, it could be actually that Crowncare has its own insurance company as a subsidiary. Captive insurance company is what it's called. And then promoting it sort of demonstrates that they are really keen to have patients gain insurance from their own subsidiary and then spend that insurance money on the dental works taken out by Crowncare. So just something to keep in mind, but also they are mitigating the risks of the VHS restrictions. It's at odds with the mission statement, and it's at odds with offering the best quality and probably the most profitable procedures available. So with this in mind, we're mitigating risk here as part of, just good risk management. And in terms of, the TARA framework, for example, we are avoiding risk by sort of declining any new VHS patients and encouraging, existing patients to either be private or to go to a different practice. Now, I imagine there might be some existing VHS patients that are quite elderly and refuse to change practice, but ultimately we can assume that pretty much everybody on their books now are private patients. Now, as we move on, we can see that the company continued to grow, acquiring further dental practices. Each practice is incorporated as a wholly owned subsidiary company of the Crowncare Group. Bingo! Confirmation that we need to have group accounts considered when we talk about our financial statements and how everything is accounted. So that is probably the most important part at this stage or at least this paragraph rather, regarding what we can assume comes up in the exam. We could be given some accounts to then rectify into a group account, for example, though typically they don't utilize many numerical based questions at all. In fact, they do not test your numerical ability. They might test you on financial statements specifically in terms of interpreting them. However, it's incredibly unlikely for you to actually have to do many calculations. It's very much a theory-based exam, so keep that in mind. Importantly, we can see that 40 of the dentists own shares in the parent company, and it also employs 110 dental nurses, 96 hygienists, and 60 reception and admin staff. Now, two things I want to point out on this. Owning shares or having options of owning shares in your company really does improve staff motivation. So even though we can see there's 105 dentists and 65 of them do not own any shares, they will be motivated by the incentive of being able to acquire shares via good performance and a long tenure as a dentist under Crowncare. So, motivationally speaking, share options are really, really good. Also, I want to point out that the staff that we have available to us, there's quite a large quantity of them, and it's very difficult to replace skilled staff. Now, of course, we know that we're well resourced in terms of being a central location in capital city, as well as all the surrounding area. So we have a wide variety of HR opportunities in regards to young aspiring professionals. However, it's very, very difficult to just pluck somebody off the street and make them a hygienist. It doesn't quite work. So in this case, we do have to be concerned with the fact that we can't easily replace our staff because they're skilled. So any disagreements, issues, stuff like that are quite important. So this emphasizes our need to be good negotiators, and I could easily see a negotiation question relating to unhappy staff because replacing them would be quite the headache for Crowncare. Okay, and now we're on to the final paragraph of video 1. And importantly, it says that each of Crowncare's practices has an average of 5,250 registered patients. That's a lot of patients. And that's very, very good in terms of that. If we think about this in terms of dental checkups, there's a checkup every 6 months. So that kind of aligns with, busy custom every day, given that they've got 5,250 registered patients at each practice roughly. And we can assume this because if those patients are visiting at least twice a year, so every 6 months for a checkup, that's 10,500 visits. And if we divide that by 365, the days in the year, in fact, we should probably do it by a smaller number because of weekends, but let's just, for the sake of it, do the days in the year, so 365. It roughly equates to around 28. So in a worst case scenario, we're looking at 28 visits per day. So patient visits per day, 28 as a worst case scenario, completely disregarding the potential for further work. So in that sense, they are very, very busy. In fact, these are probably large dental practices, and they very much, have a very busy customer flow, which is great for working capital, all those kind of cycles, which we'll get to further on. But of course, at this point, we can just assume cash flow is probably pretty good. Money running through the business at a good pace, 28 patients per day. That's pretty good. Each practice has a natural catchment area where most register with the nearby dentist. So it kind of has an inbuilt customer trend, which is fairly unfortunate, I guess, for Crowncare, because it necessitates that they buy up different areas where they don't have a practice to ensure they're attracting more custom. However, importantly, there is nothing to prevent a patient from registering with any dentist regardless of location. So in this case, we can perhaps think about marketing. Now, when we think about dentists, we don't really think about marketing, but it is an increasing trend in the industry to spend more on marketing or get consultants help on marketing, and they could, in theory, market to these patients outside their existing natural catchment areas to try and circumvent the fact that they're more likely to go to rivals that are more or closer to their location. But this could be an avenue or opportunity rather, as part of our SWOT analysis, to gain more patients to our practices without actually acquiring more practices in a raw sense. So it might be a cheaper way to gain more custom and grow more organically rather than have inorganic growth where you're purchasing the different practices that are not currently owned by Crowncare. And that is everything for this video. I hope you found it very interesting and helpful in terms of understanding how we can pull different parts from these pages, and hopefully you enjoy the next ones coming up as we go through each page. So with that said, I'll see you in the next video, and good luck with your further studies of the MCS for this February sitting. Hello, it's me again. I just wanted to take a few minutes of your time to first extend my hope that you enjoyed the free sample that you've just viewed, but also to just sort of explain what else Astranti do to help you pass your exam really effectively, provided you found our sample particularly interesting and insightful, of course. So, of course, we have a study text for every module, ranging from P1 to F3, and the certificate level is also free on our website. So we have study texts throughout the CIMA course, every module you could hope to study. The certificate level are free, as I mentioned, and then the rest of them, ranging from P1 to F3, are all available to purchase. Alongside this, if you're not so much a study text kind of student and you prefer a visual way of learning, we have the course videos. We essentially break down the study text into bite-sized presentations with a walkthrough, and it's a very, very, very engaging way of explaining the course. Following this, we have the pre-scene analysis, where we break down each pre-scene sitting into a number of videos, going through the whole document, but also adding a top 10 recommendations for what will come up in the exam, and also a strategic analysis where we put all the models you'd find in E2, for example, to the pre-scene itself, whichever that may be at the time. Alongside this, we provide an industry analysis. This is a document and accompanying video which help you give that contextual information in your exam. So, for example, if the pre-scene's on the oil industry, the industry analysis will break down the oil industry, the current topics, trends, issues, what the competitive market looks like, all those kind of aspects, all condensed into one so you can spend your time wisely in your study period. Following on from this, when you actually want to practice all this knowledge, we have mock exams for all of our materials. So StudyText has a generic mock exam based on the module, whereas the pre-scene analysis has mocks available to purchase that are based on that specific pre-scene, that are targeted to the key issues we believe will come up. And if you're not content with just doing those mock exams and practicing that way, we have a marking and feedback system where you can purchase the ability to send in your paper, have it marked by a CIMA qualified accountant, and get personalized feedback on whether you can improve X or Y area. And sort of finally, if you will, if you're feeling really underprepared and that exam is coming really, really soon, the masterclasses are offered by Astranti, and they're essentially a crash course in anything you could want for that topic. So if it's a masterclass on the pre-scene, it's going to give you absolutely everything that you could possibly need to know about the pre-scene in one really condensed sitting. Likewise, if it was the F3 masterclass, you would have all of F3 gone through in a very crash course style presentation and video link. You can also purchase it post-stream as opposed to viewing it live, all these kind of aspects. We are very, very confident that these materials will help you get the exam success that you want. So we have a pass guarantee. Provided you fill out a form which demonstrates that you have utilized our materials to a large extent and actually taken the time to study them, and you have unfortunately failed, we will offer you the same materials again for the next sitting as a consolidatory offer to ensure that you can get back on the horse and get that exam grade that you want. With that said, thank you very much for watching the sample video. I hope you enjoyed it and it gives you a lot of confidence in Astranti and your CIMA future.